Hello and welcome to Just Roots Kitchen Intuition Cooking Workshop. It's a beautiful summer month. July is one of my favorite seasons and probably all of us or favorite months because we have a glorious bounty of fruits and vegetables available right here locally. It's just incredible. So I chose today's a little bit different. We typically make a meal for these kitchen intuition workshops, and I thought it would be a good idea to focus on dips, sort of side dishes for this workshop. And the reason being is because as a farmer and a part-time worker at Just Roots, I'm finding I'm always just in a rush and needing a snack to grab. And usually those snacks end up being sort of not super nourishing for my body because they're quick and easy. And I find that making dips like this is it's kind of the key to like making sure I'm eating fruits and vegetables and getting the nutrition that I need. And I can still have it with chips or crackers or things that kind of satisfy my snacking. Another wonderful thing about it is like what goes along with this summer bounty is we have like so many fruits and vegetables in our refrigerators. If you have a CSA with Just Roots or another farm, you grow food or you go to a farmer's market, you're gonna definitely experience veggie overload. And I find this is a nice way to use up both of these dips, to use a bunch of your vegetables and just have it in the fridge ready to go. So we're going to be making an oven roasted bruschetta. So unlike a traditional bruschetta, these tomatoes are going to be roasted in the oven. And we're also going to make a Swiss chard tahini dip. And this was a dip that I discovered a few years ago online, a website for it, because I was like, what do I do with all this Swiss chard? I'm sick of it. And now I'm absolutely in love. It is a little bit messy making these dishes, and we've got a lot to get through. So we're going to try our best to get through everything. I'm going to quickly go over all the ingredients and materials I need to make these recipes. There's garlic in both of the recipes. We're going to mince it, and you have an option to leave some whole in cloves. Tahini is such a wonderful thing. It's basically, if you think about nut butter, this is seed butter. It's blended sesame seeds. So if you have a sesame allergy, you don't want to use this. Really brings a creamy, rich, bitter, just wonderful texture to things. Salt and pepper almost always. I got out a little vinegar. So this isn't mandatory. Tomatoes have plenty of acidity, but I like to put a touch of balsamic or apple cider vinegar, or red wine vinegar in my bruschetta. We got a pint of cherry tomatoes, which we're going to cut in half. Some lemons. We need lemon juice for the Swiss chard dip. Cucumbers, I have some old ones, and these are really just for like dipping into your delicious Swiss chard dip. There's, you probably got a baguette. We ran out before I got them, so just any kind of bread will work. Toasted really nice for your dipping your bruschetta. Olive oil, of course, we used quite a bit in this recipe for both of them, so that's why we wanted to provide some for you. And then Swiss chard. Now, this is important, folks. I am not using both bunches of Swiss chard. These are really big bunches, and when I put them on my scale, it was double the amount that I needed, so it was closer to 3 pounds. So I'm just using one bunch to keep things simple. If you want to weigh out your chard to a pound and a half, you can do that. Maybe it's a few extra sprigs from the other bunch or a few extra leaves, but I think one bunch is perfect for this recipe. So one of your 2 bunches, your other bunch, you're going to do something else with, maybe have it sauteed with eggs or who knows. Some tools that I find helpful, measuring spoons, just for salt and pepper and whatever you like. I'm using a 1/2 cup and a 1/3 cup today, but you can use a liquid measuring cup, whatever you like. For your tomatoes, we're going to get those cooking in the oven really soon. You can use any kind of sheet pan that has sides so that the oil doesn't spill over, or just a big old cast iron. That's what I'm going to be using today. I'm not using the sheet pan, but that's fine. You can use sheet pan. A spatula is really helpful for working with tahini. It's extremely sticky. You have to stir it Spatulas are really nice if you have one, if not a wooden spoon. In order to strain some of the juice that we're going to be creating when we make our tahini, you will want to have like an extra bowl to strain it into because we're not getting rid of it. We're going to use some of it. And then some kind of strainer. You could use fine mesh or like a colander, whatever's clever. All right. Lemon squeezer, if you have it, or one of those little dishes so you can squeeze lemons in, or just, use your hand to filter out the seeds. I've got a bowl so I could squeeze it in there. I'm using a big sort of enameled pot, cast iron pot for the Swiss chard. You're gonna have to, all of those leaves are gonna go in the pot with the stems. So just make sure it's big enough that it could fit all of that Swiss chard in one pot, noting that the leaves really wilt. And then just one more bowl and a wooden spoon is what I have out. All right, now that we've spent lots of time on that, let's get started. The first thing we're going to need to do is preheat our oven. So you're going to set it to 300 degrees Fahrenheit on roast if you have that option. And there, it's doing its job. Now, if you're going to use your sheet pan or your regular pan, it doesn't matter to me. We're going to cut our tomatoes in half and just toss them into that sheet pan. We'll do some stirring later. So just some quick cuts, cutting them in half, doesn't have to be perfect.
Brooke, you mentioned straining them. That comes later after it's cooked?
Yeah, so we're going to actually strain the Swiss chard dip. It's not going to be for the tomatoes. The tomatoes we're going to keep in the olive oil. And that's a great question. So in the Swiss chard dip, we're going to get the tomatoes going first just because they take about 30 minutes and we can stick them in there, be done, and not think about it, set a timer. With the Swiss chard dip, we cook them in a lot of olive oil and they are leafy greens, so they make a lot of liquid. And we're going to strain out the majority of that liquid and save a little bit to make it easier to blend. And speaking of blending, one thing I knew I'd forget because it wasn't worth the rest is a food processor. This is really helpful for this recipe. If you don't have a food processor, that adds quite a bit of labor because you're going to have to stir it by hand, and a blender could work too, a nice strong blender. You'll have to do it by hand and chop up that Swiss chard. Super fun. But the food processor makes it really great. And we reserve some of the liquid from the Swiss chard cooking to help make it easier for the food processor to do its job. So a nice quick slice in half. And one thing I want to point out too is like these two recipes are amazing. My go-to thing is if I have tomatoes that are starting to like wilt and get that sort of like pruned look on their skins, this is what I do to them. So they get used, they're not bad yet, but they're like a little wrinkly. This is like a perfect recipe for that. And the same thing with like your greens. You could do this with collard greens, kale and Swiss chard. When they're really wilty, you're like, this doesn't look so great. Make a dip with it. So these are ginormous garlic cloves. I think we all probably got the same ones in our do-it-yourself kit. So just keep that in mind. The recipe calls for 6 to 8 cloves. I'm still going to do probably 6 cloves because I'm obsessed with garlic. But if you have, a little difficulty with digestion or get heartburn from it, cut it back. Now, something I want to point out is I have made this recipe both ways. One way in which I mince the garlic, and another way, which is kind of a really lovely way to do it, you could do either or both, is actually leaving the garlic in the skins and cooking them in with their skins. And then when 30 minutes is up, you pop the garlic out of the clove and it has just the creamiest texture because it was cooking basically in the contained skin. It's totally up to you. You could do one, both, try it out, but I love roasting whole cloves with lots of olive oil. I think it just brings a different dimension, kind of a deeper flavor to the garlic. So I'm just doing a little, the tricks, the many tricks you can do with garlic. But if you want to use your food processor, you're welcome to do that to mince it up. You can mince it by hand, or you can leave those whole and just toss them in. They might take a little bit more time because they're such big cloves to cook. Because usually when I do this, they're not, these elephant-sized garlic cloves to cook all the way through. But I think they'd be fine with 30 minutes with the rest of the tomatoes. And something wonderful about this dish is like the longer you cook the tomatoes, as long as you're not burning it and it's on a pretty low heat, like 300, the more like sweet and caramelized they taste. So you can cook them a little longer if the garlic needs it.
Are we putting the olive oil in with the tomatoes yet, or is that after, just for brushing or something? We're not
we
cooking,
can,
just cook it.
oops, I missed the last part of it, but basically, we can, for the tomato recipe, you can put it in now or later. Or
Okay,
you can just stay with at my pace if you want. Basically, we're just gonna plop in all of our ingredients,
yeah,
add olive oil, salt, and pepper, and stick it in the oven.
I like that. I like how you flatten that with the knife too, kind of.
Sometimes when I use like big chef's knives, it's nice. You can just pop it without even pressing. That was okay. That's so much garlic, and it's the perfect amount of garlic for me. I'm gonna use my food processor just to save on time. Don't worry if you're falling a little bit behind. We'll have plenty of time. I'm gonna put this on mute so you can't hear this very loud noise. 1 second. All right. So again, leave them whole, mince them. You can mince by hand or in a food processor. And this is also when that wonderful spatula comes in handy. I love a bendy spatula for cooking, especially if they're heat proof. You can get them at Target for really cheap, a couple bucks. Or probably any box store. All right, and I'm just making sure to get most, if not all of this garlic out so I don't have to wash this again. The dish has garlic in it, but it's not raw, so. So now, if you notice, the recipe says 2 to 6 tablespoons of olive oil, depending on preference and pan size. Basically, the important thing here is I want to coat the entire bottom of my pan and be able to stir around my tomatoes and garlic, make sure they're coated in garlic. Coated in olive oil. You do not want them to burn and be just on the bottom of your pan or sheet pan. So just keep that in mind. We're gonna do olive oil. I'm gonna start off with like 3 tablespoons because I'm using a pretty big pan. See where I'm at, add more if I need to. And then salt and pepper to taste. So.
And that's just the Swiss chard, right? I mean, the ribs.
We're not doing the ribs yet. We're just doing the tomato dish right now.
Oh, okay. Oh, good, good. I gotcha.
Yeah. So we're just adding the olive oil.
Oh, before we cook it in the oven.
Yep. We haven't done anything with the Swiss chard dip yet.
Okay. And are we putting getting the basil ready to put in there too, or is that coming after?
The basil goes after. So
Okay.
you're not going to cook with the basil in it.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so 3 tablespoons. I think it was a little short for me, so I'm going to do 2 more. Make it 5. And if you're not, I think the olive oil really helps spread this dip, and so just don't be afraid to use a lot. You're not probably going to sit and eat the whole thing. So yeah, my happy medium was about 5 tablespoons, and then I'm going to do some salt and pepper to taste. So I'll just measure mine out. I'm going to use just under about a half teaspoon here. You can always add more after. And because I like pepper, I'm going to use a half teaspoon of that. Something maybe not quite a half, maybe a fourth. So a 4th teaspoon of pepper. I'm gonna wait till that finishes. And a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And then something else you can add is a little pinch of red pepper flake. It really kind of brings the flavors together. That's something I always put in mine. If you've got it at home and you like a little bit of heat. Give that a good stir, and that was my oven telling me it's ready. So I'm going to stir these up and plop them in, and we'll check on them in a little bit, give them a stir. But the tomatoes are going to exude a bit of juice as well, so it's okay if it's not perfectly, the olive oil is not perfectly covering everything. Once these are pretty much finished, we're going to take them out and mix in some more some basil, which I have to run to my garden to get because we didn't have any for my kit. So I'm going to set a 30-minute timer for these tomatoes. I put them on a middle rack. It doesn't really matter. It's only at 300, so if you put them on top, it's not the end of the world. And now we're going to move on to our Swiss chard dip. So feel free to take a minute to clean up your station. Something I always like doing when I feel discombobulated. And we're going to go ahead and start with the Swiss chard. So Swiss chard is kind of like kale. It has long stems that are a bit more difficult to digest, and then soft leaves. And so what we're going to do now is you can just do this with a hand, is you're going to kind of do your best to rip off mostly just the leaf, leaving the stem intact. Such beautiful colors. So we are separating the leaf from the stem. It doesn't have to be perfect. You know, sometimes they get a little stem or a little leaf on either part. This is just so that we can cook it evenly. Swiss chard has such a distinct smell, and if you've enjoyed beets before, you might notice that they are very similar in scent and in appearance. Swiss chard and beets are related, very closely related. One has been selected for the leaf growth, which is chard, and the other has been selected for a root growth. So they're essentially the same plant, evolved from the same plant. And I think it's really cool. They're like a Mediterranean plant. I think they were first found in like Mediterranean shores by the sea. And I actually know a farmer who would irrigate beets with some of the ocean water that came through their farm. And they actually survived and did well with it. And it made really good beets and chard, probably because they've adapted to be that way. All right. So I've got my leaves. I'm just going to stick them in a little bowl for now so they're out of the way. And we're going to start chopping up, first and foremost, these chard leaves. And I'm just doing the roughest chop because remember, guys, this is all going through a food processor. And if you chop this is the one point I want to make. I do it nice and small. And the reason being is because that lowers the cook time overall. There's more surface area. It's going to cook faster. So it doesn't matter if it's a rough chop or they're a little uneven. You just generally want to make a pretty small chop. Such a beautiful color. I don't know if you guys are into experimenting with food or you have kids and you want to do funky stuff, but chard stems and of course beets can dye rice. Like if you boil beets in water and you get that beautiful deep red, dropped some stuff. You get a beautiful deep red color. You can then cook your rice in that beet water and have hot pink rice. Kids,
that's cool.
Some kids love that. Okay, so now we're gonna do about a third cup of oil that we're gonna start cooking this Swiss chard in a separate, I have this like cast iron pan. Just want to do it so there's enough room in it to put all of the Swiss chard, which is kind of a lot. Right, and so one third cup should be good for now. We may have to add a little bit of water if they're sticking, depending on your pot size, but go ahead and start with that. We're gonna put it right on medium heat. You can get it going quite a bit. There's a third cup. We'll evenly coat the bottom there. And you can always use more, / you can also use some water. I'm gonna plop them right in. I don't like to lift up cutting boards, so I always use my knife, but there are a million ways to do it. Okay. So that is cooking now, and the next thing we're going to add to this Swiss chard is not the leaves. It's actually going to be more garlic. So I do like to use quite a bit of garlic on here. We're going to use 5 cloves, so it is a garlic heavy dip night. Keep all of the vampires away, for sure. I'm going to get out my 5 cloves, and we're going to mince those too. Feel free to use a food processor or hand mince them, whatever you have available to you. Compost bin is already overflowing with garlic. Maybe I'm doing a few more just to finish off that whole clove, and that's fine by me. You don't have to be too exacting in recipes like this. Some recipes are very much a science, and some are a bit of an art, and some just involve your own preferences. If you like things more salty than other people, or less salty, or more acidic or less acidic. Like I said, with the tomatoes, you are welcome to add vinegar, which is what I like to do, but sometimes that's too acidic for people, especially because tomatoes are high in acidity. So my pan should be heating up with the Swiss chard stems, and we're going to cook them for about 5 to 7 minutes until those stems seem pretty tender. We want them to be able to break up in that food processor with no problem. At that point, we'll add our garlic, saute for a couple minutes, just a light saute. Then we're going to add some torn up or chopped up Swiss chard leaves. A lot to get through today, but I think we'll be able to leave on a note or hang out a little bit late if anybody has questions if we don't quite get to the end. One thing we probably won't have time to do together is just toast your bread, but you can do that in the oven or in a toaster. And that's just for serving the bruschetta, the tomato dish, on. Okay, in 1 second, I'm going to turn on my food processor again and blend up those 5 to however many you're comfortable with cloves of garlic.
Should we do it fork tender or mushy for the Swiss chard, or is it just going to be fork tender?
Fork tender can be, that's totally fine because we're going to be blending it. You just don't want it to be hard. Good question. And so I'm not going to add my garlic yet. I want those chard to be all broken down before I do that. So in like 5 or something minutes. Okay, great. So while we have 1 second, I'm going to pause and run and grab some basil for myself out of the garden, and I will be right back. I promise.
And I just wanted to ask one question before you go. When we get through this, if we're getting it, are we or there's olive oil that we're steaming cooking it in, is that gonna go in the processor too altogether, or just grab out the stems?
Yeah. So, I mean, the olive oil mixture that you're cooking, the
Mhm.
Swiss chard and olive oil that it's cooking
Oh,
in
yeah.
right now, that's going to go back into the blender. And then
Okay.
you may choose to add, I usually do sometimes add some more olive oil on top.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
it helps with the dip is heavily olive oil based. So
Yeah.
typically I add like another third cup as I'm blending it.
Okay, cool.
But you know, we'll talk when we get there, we'll talk about it because it's not totally
Yeah.
necessary to add it. You could add more of the like watered down version if you don't want that much oil.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm right back. Okay, I'm a little out of breath, but I'm back. Great. Got my basil. I love being able to grow my own herbs because they stay fresh longer. Make sure to stir those stems. And a medium high heat is just great for 5 to 7 minutes. Now I can catch my breath. So if you've got a minute, no rush if you don't. It's a great time to sort of start to process these chard leaves. You can rip them by hand, or what I think is just faster is this like what people call the cigar method, where you kind of like stack or roll them in a bunch and just like make ribbons. Again, like the smaller the better because they're going to cook faster, but it doesn't have to be tiny by any means. And you know, your blender, your food processor, if it has trouble breaking down green leafy things, maybe do it a little smaller. So I just go across it vertically and horizontally.
And you're gonna process it before cooking, correct?
Nope, we're going to process it after it gets cooked.
Okay. Is that, I'm sorry, Brooke, all these questions tonight.
No,
Is
I
that,
love them. And
oh,
if you're
good.
getting them, other people are.
Are you, is this gonna go in with the already cooked stems?
Yes, yeah.
Yay.
So
Okay.
it might help to know the reason we cook the stems first is because they take longer to cook. So you don't want to overcook the leaves. They only take a minute or two,
Makes
but the
sense.
stems take 5 to 7 minutes to get nice and soft. Now you could totally make this recipe again and just ignore the stems and not use them, but I like to use every part of it if I can. And if you're also at a good place right now, it's a good time to just take a peek at those tomatoes and see what they look like. Maybe give them a stir. You should start to see minimal browning on your garlic. If it's browning a lot, add more olive oil. And the reason why we're at 300 is because we want those tomatoes to slowly seep out a lot of their liquid. I've also made this dish in a pinch when I'm having friends over, and I was like, I don't have much in my kitchen. I have tomatoes and garlic. And I threw it in there at like 430 and I just, did it really quick. And it worked, but that wouldn't be my ideal preference for baking it. But, if you're in a pinch and you're hungry, just turn the heat up, add more oil, make sure it doesn't burn. So sometimes you can use your senses to tell when things are getting close to ready. With beets and Swiss chard, I pick up this so they're very earthy when they're cooking. They smell really earthy. But then at some point you start to get this really sweet, nutty scent. And that's kind of when I'm like, oh, those sugars are breaking down. So it's the fibers and starch in there are breaking down. So that's a good sign. It means you're almost there. Again, you don't want to be seeing browning or crisping here. We want soft chard. And if you are seeing browning and crisping, that means add a tablespoon more of olive oil. I'm going to give mine a little taste. Not quite. Still has a minute or so. Oh, well, now it's a fine time to add your garlic if you are ready and you've processed it. And we really only need a minute or two with the garlic. So by the time the garlic's ready, my charred stems are ready. And then I'm going to throw in the rest of my charred leaves. So this is such a nice dip to serve with a Mediterranean meal. I'm having some friends over tomorrow and we're gonna have falafel. It's similar to a baba ganoush if you've ever had that, which is a roasted eggplant and tahini dish. So I really we're gonna make falafel and some pitas and a fig salad. We'll have some dips served with cucumber. And you can even recreate the tomato dish if you want. So I'm just making sure that garlic is evenly spread in this pot. And we're gonna get it cooked for a minute or two before I go ahead and toss in some of my chard. So for seasoning, we're gonna do salt and pepper. Again, I really don't like to tell people how much salt or pepper to use because pepper is very much to taste and salt is also, and it is a health issue for a lot of people who can't have too much salt. So do what's best for you. And if you're uncomfortable with making those decisions on your own, you're welcome to just do what I do, which I'll say out loud. So great. There's two options. You can do salt and pepper now, or you could do it while it's in the blender. I kind of like to cook it with salt and pepper. I think it lets out the last. Salt makes vegetables sweat. So if you do it now, more of that moisture will come out into the pan. So that being said, for this dip, I'm going to start off with a half teaspoon of salt. And I'm going to do the same as we did with the tomatoes, about a quarter teaspoon of pepper. And just know you can add more later. You can't subtract it. So I like to start light. Now, the salt really does get eaten away at by the tahini because it's so thick. So you will probably find you want to add more salt. Okay, so now it is time. My garlic is a nice brown color in there. I'm going to go ahead and add in my leaves, little bits at a time, and stir them in so they kind of get evenly coated. So I just grabbed a big handful, did a stir. If you're seeing burning, it's a great time to add, a tablespoon or two of water or oil. You don't want to burn your leaves. Another one. And maybe move to medium heat if you were on medium high or high. But if you're already on medium, just stick there. All right, make sure to stir that really well. So I like to cover it for a little bit to get that extra liquid out. And we're gonna like let this sit for, 5 to 7, sometimes even 10 minutes, depending on how much is in your pan, how big your pan is. And then we'll move on to our next step, which is gonna be squeezing that liquid out. Okay, in the meantime, there's a couple things we can do to prep. And you guys are doing great. It's 5:37. We have plenty of time. If you need me to slow down, holler. If you have questions, ask. Don't need this. I'm gonna get my lemons juiced and my cucumbers cut up for serving. And the station clean. So I covered the chard just so I don't have to think about it so much or add water. If you don't have a cover for your pan, then I would suggest adding a tablespoon or 2 of water because it's going to evaporate versus here it's going to stay in the pot. And a lower heat is good, like mine's on medium low. Okay, so I guess I'm going to start with lemons. I'm going to get, I think we want, this is also something to taste, but I think about a 1/3 cup of lemon juice tends to be pretty perfect for this recipe, for me. So I like to squeeze it if I can directly into this to measure and into a bowl. I'm looking for a 1/3 cup. This is going to go in at the very end when we're food processing the dip. Now you might get away with using just 1 lemon because these are really nice juicy lemons. We'll see. Yeah, I'm just shy of a 1/3 of a cup. So I might just squeeze another half. The lemon is really important in this dish. It just brings a brightness where if I make salad dressings or anything with tahini, I always add lemon because tahini is such a bold, rich, bitter flavor, and the acidity just super brightens it. Same with vinegar. Vinegar with tahini also works really well in salad dressings. And folks, if you haven't used tahini before, I can't eat nuts, so I totally fell in love with it as a substitute to have that rich creaminess. But tahini makes just the tiniest bit of tahini makes the most delicious salad dressing ever. We have a video on our YouTube of how to make your own homemade salad dressings, and one of them is a maple balsamic tahini, and it's to die for. I suggest looking that up. I've seen vegan tahini Caesar dressings. There's just, it just makes a wonderful dressing. Really elevates your dressing game. Doing a little check and stir. So I've had that water condensed on the lid here. That's good. That means we've got enough cooking liquid. I want to keep that in there another few minutes so everything gets nice and soft. So I've got my lemon juice, a 1/3 of a cup of lemon juice. I'm going to give I have some old cucumbers I want to use first. I'm going to give them a rinse. Some parts of them are not lovely, but most is.
Today is full of question time. So so now the leaves are cooked down pretty well, but there's a lot of liquid in the bottom of the pan. Okay. And when I go to food process it, that will all kind of go in together?
No, so
Okay.
you're always just one step ahead of me. I'm sorry.
Okay, so sorry. No.
No,
Okay.
no, it's good. I like talking through it first. So the reason we have either a strainer or a colander is that we are going to strain and press out the liquid in that Swiss chard. It's going to be hot, so you can use a wooden spoon to press it out. Save the liquid, and we're going to use little bits of that liquid at a time. We're not probably going to use the whole thing, but we'll basically use about uh, anywhere from 2 tablespoons to a half cup of that liquid to help with the blending process. So instead of just adding like pure oil, you have this like sort of garlicky, more watery something to help the food processor process and to give more liquid to the mix. So we're just going to use some of it, not all of it. We'll start off with 1 or 2 tablespoons, and you can work your way up if you need more, if that makes sense. So if you are ahead of me, yeah, just start with 1, blend. If it's not blending, do 2, and so on. And I'm just going to arrange my little cucumber slices on a plate. You can also dip, if you have like farm fresh radishes, if you're in our CSA program, those would be great in the Swiss chard dip. Any kind of crackers.
I also had a question about the what if you know this. So I don't normally compost citrus, but I heard if you don't use a lot of citrus, it's okay.
Yeah. This has been a part of my life for many years.
Okay.
Because we used to get like a farm I ran got Trader Joe's compost, which meant tons of citrus. So you can definitely put it in. It takes a long, long, long time to break down. So if you're okay with that, great. I
Okay.
always stick mine in my compost. I find maybe it'll make it through 2 cycles of composting before it's like fully broken down.
Yeah.
If you get a really hot pile, it works too. Yeah, I don't have a problem with it.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question. I love composting and talking about microorganisms that break all of the amazing food scraps and manure and hay and waste products we have down. But we don't have to talk about that while we're cooking. Don't have to get in the nitty-gritty. All right, so I've got some cucumber ready to go. I probably don't need this one. And I'm going to do a check on my chard. Lots of great cooking liquid. It's nice and soft. And it might be a good time, if it's not too hot, to taste a little bit and say, do I think I'm going to want more salt than that? You probably are. And you can always add that as we're blending. So the next step we have is we're going to strain it. And again, you can use something like this, fine mesh, or one of these, whatever works. And so we're gonna get as much juice out of it as we can for now. And you just don't need all of it. If you have a lot of extra cooking liquid, just remember, you're only gonna use a couple tablespoons, very likely. I'm just transferring it so I can get the extra liquid out, but I want to save it, so I'm transferring it into a bowl instead of in the sink. If you forgot to do that, no problem. You can just use olive oil or water or anything to help the consistency, because tahini is like the thickest paste you've ever seen. It's like putting nut butter into a dip, so it's going to be really thick, and the juice, some kind of liquid is necessary. Okay, I'm going to use some pot holders so I can drain the rest. I really don't have too much. Okay. Go to the sink. We don't need it anymore. Then I like to use a wooden spoon to get some pressing. Do some pressing. Or actually, I can use my same little spatula here. And you'll see what you're left with is like a cup and a half or maybe 2 cups of the Swiss chard. And that's great. Now look at the color. It's like a really brownish, greenish, yellow. If you look at that and then compare that to water, what you're adding back into this when you do is a lot more rich and flavorful. Okay. Great, so now I'm going to put this in my food processor, and I'm going to start off with just that. Now, if you only have a small food processor like me, you may have to work in batches. Okay, folks, that was my timer for the tomatoes. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. They're going to be fine sitting there. I just want to get this in the food processor. You set a timer, yours is probably going off too.
If the tomatoes have gone off, we just put them up on the stovetop.
Yeah, well, we're going to take a look at them and we're going to see if we want them to go in a little bit longer. See how they're doing. Now you can always turn the heat up. I'll show you in just a second. We'll get tried to do that without making a mess. It's not easy. So I made this dip backstory for Just Roots at a CSA pickup. So I had to make this recipe times like 20, and it was very messy and very fun and delicious, but I definitely made a big old mess. Okay, I'm going to cover that because I'm going to blend it first without adding other things. But, little pause. Hot. Right, so what you want to look for with your tomatoes is that your garlic is brown and your tomatoes are sort of wrinkly and cooked looking. A little hard to see, isn't it? So that is a good sign for me. I love it. We can let that sit for a minute while we blend, and then we'll finish it off by adding in some basil. So we're like pretty much done with that one. You might add salt and pepper to taste, but I think, yeah, that's it. And then you can toast your bread, serve it on top of bread. It stores really well in the fridge. It's good cold, it's good warm. It's just such a wonderful dish. All right. I'm going to do a little blending, so I'm going to put it on mute. Okay, so I just did a little blending to see how my machine did, and it actually did pretty well, but there's no tahini in there yet. So what I'm going to do is add my lemon juice, which is about 1/3 of a cup. So that's in there. Then we can measure out about 1/2 cup of tahini. Now, I don't think you should add it all at once. I would do about 1/4 cup and 1/4 cup. And where is my favorite? There it is. I'm using one of my old tahini containers first, and then I'll open the new one. But I'm going to measure out 1/2 cup, and I'm going to just split it in 2 and do 2 rounds of blending the tahini. It just gives the machine a little bit less to work with. So, oh, one thing with a new jar of tahini, you'll notice that there's a thick layer of oil on top and the actual paste is under the oil. It separates. That's natural, that's normal. What you should do is stir it as well as you can with a spoon or whatever fork or whatever you can and get it incorporated as much as possible. So it's more of like a creamy mixture, not like a dry bottom and an oily top. So I can demonstrate that in 1 second. So here's, what my tahini looks like. There's a lot of oil on top. We don't want it that thin. That's why we need to mix. Swiss chard on the floor. All right, so I'm getting my spoon all the way at the bottom into the edges and corners and doing some mixing. Sometimes I find even small movements are better. And you kind of can see what it's like for the blender to work with this stuff, huh? So once you're mixed, you can finish measuring out a half of a cup of tahini. Now, as cooks, I always encourage people to taste the ingredients before they get mixed up together. Obviously, it comes together a lot better to get. Let's try that again. It comes together really well to get with all the ingredients, but you can get a sense of like, I taste the bitter, I taste the nuttiness, the earthiness, and it's just amazing when it does all come together. Okay, so I've got my lemon juice in there. I've got my tahini. I'm going to do about half of it to start. Just to not overwhelm my little blender here. And then we're going to add some oil. So the recipe calls for 1/3 of a cup. And so you can do all of 1/3, or what I like to do is do it slowly. So I'm going to measure out 1/3 of a cup, do half, and then add more. All right, and I'm going to turn the blender on. And you might notice it's pretty thick, and I haven't even finished my tahini. So what that means is I want to put in some of my cooking liquid. So you can start tablespoon at a time. I know roughly what a tablespoon is, and I know I'm probably going to use about 2. 1, 2. I'll hang on to this in case I want more. And do a blend. And then you can add in the rest of your ingredients, your olive oil, your tahini, and you may want to adjust salt and pepper. So once you do this like last little blend, decide if you want to add salt and pepper. And if you do one more blend with it. It's messy. All right, volume off. So great time to give it a taste. I thought I had a spoon. I'm gonna get another one. And you can add more lemon juice, more salt and pepper. So yummy. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna add a little salt to mine. Probably about another 1/2 teaspoon. Give it one final blend. Right, so to know that it's finished, you should see like green specks in there, but no big chunks of anything. You can try it with a cucumber. It's so good, so rich. I love the bitterness. It's just, oh my goodness. One of my favorites. Okay. We're almost at time, which is perfect because we are almost done. The last thing we're gonna do is just cut up some basil and mix it in with our nice and hot and toasty tomatoes. And then you guys can roast your baguettes. And
Are we cutting the baguettes like in half, or are we just doing it whole? Sorry.
yeah, this isn't, we just added this because we had a little extra money to put in the kids. Why not give people bread? But toast your bread however you like to. You can, what I do is put it in half. I either spread some warm butter or olive oil. Sometimes I make garlic bread, but no need because there's plenty of garlic in this. You can just use like a brush or put a little tiny bit of olive oil on it. Roast it at like 425 Fahrenheit. Keep a close eye on it. So just a minute or two. And then you can put the hot bruschetta on top.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm using about, I guess this would be about a 1/3 cup of basil. And I'm roughly chopping, really rough. You can do as skinny or as fat as you'd like. I include the stems. I have no problem eating stems if they're not too tough. And folks, I know it's hard to get basil in these kits because it takes a little bit before we can get them to you. So one trick I suggest is take your basil, wrap it in a paper towel and stick it in a Ziploc bag. And that really extends the life, especially if the paper towel is just slightly damp. Not sure if you saw this, but I just added, I just added the basil to my tomatoes. And then I'm going to give it a nice stir with a wooden spoon. Give it a smell too. Holy moly, that smells so good. So also imagine making this dish raw as it traditionally could be. It's so yummy both ways with raw garlic, maybe a little raw onion. And just to make the flavor a little bold, I'm going to put in a dash of vinegar. Vinegar of choice works. I'm using balsamic. It's my favorite for this dish. Can't go wrong with tomato, basil, and balsamic. And I'd say I'm using like, a 1/4 of a teaspoon, an 1/8 of a teaspoon. Just one quick little dash. And I don't have bread right now toasted, but I'm going to give it a try. As you stir it, you'll notice the tomato breaks down more and you're left with more skins. And it sort of just makes a beautiful dip. One of the most amazing things in the world. Adjust with salt and pepper. I think it's perfect. No changes here. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed our summer delicious dips. If you have any questions, feel free to stay on and ask them. We'll post this video soon on our YouTube channel. And I hope you all have wonderful nights and enjoy your Swiss chard tahini dip and your oven roasted bruschetta.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Okay, take care.